Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're turning our attention to a deeply solemn, incredibly urgent event that recently unfolded in Thailand. We're going to examine the tragic mass casualty event that took place in Nonthaburi province, which is just about 15 kilometers northwest of central Bangkok. It's an incident that has completely shocked the nation, and it raises some really profound questions about safety and regulation. By looking closely at the raw facts, the timeline, and the broader context, we're aiming to understand exactly what happened here and why it matters to all of us.
Look, the sheer gravity of this situation really cannot be overstated. A 14-year-old student opened fire at a massive suburban secondary school, turning what should have been just a normal Friday morning into an absolute nightmare. It left an entire community completely shattered. And to truly grasp the magnitude of this event, we need to carefully break down the sequence of events, the background of the suspect, and the systemic issues that allowed something like this to even occur.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the tragedy in Nonthaburi to understand the setting. Second, we'll cover the attack and the evacuation. Third, the facts surrounding the 14-year-old suspect. Fourth, the emergency response. And finally, we'll zoom out to look at the broader picture of Thailand's gun control debate. Part 1. The tragedy in Nonthaburi province. Let's set the scene. The shooting occurred at Debsan Nonthaburi School, which sits in a bustling, densely populated suburban commuter hub right on the outskirts of Bangkok. To put the scale of the school into perspective, the enrollment size for the academic year is 3,100 students. They range in age from just 8 to 18 years old, guided by 147 teachers. So you have to imagine it's essentially a small town within itself, and that sheer scale made the ensuing panic and chaos all the more difficult to manage. Gravely, we have to look at the reported death toll, which stands at 7. This is just a heartbreaking figure. It includes 3 dedicated teachers and 3 young students who lost their lives on campus. The 7th fatality is the 14-year-old shooter himself. And beyond those who tragically lost their lives, a significant number of people were wounded. Now, initial reports from the chaotic scene cited 15 injured, but police later confirmed that 23 people were actually wounded. Many of these injuries happened as terrified students were fleeing the campus in a desperate attempt to escape the gunfire. Moving to part 2, the attack and the widespread panic of the evacuation. We have an eyewitness account from a student that really adds a chilling human element to these raw facts. They said, "I initially thought there were firecrackers going off or someone banging an object, and then it went quiet before coming back again." I mean, that perfectly captures the initial confusion that so often accompanies these tragedies, right? For those first few critical moments, the students' minds are just trying to rationalize those horrific sounds as something normal before the grim reality actually sets in. And as that reality did set in, the sequence of events the students witnessed was truly horrifying. Eyewitnesses reported seeing the shooter systematically moving from classroom to classroom, firing directly into the rooms. One student even recounted the deeply traumatic experience of watching her own teacher get shot before she and her friends managed to evacuate the building. Let's move to part 3. The shocking details surrounding the 14-year-old suspect. Let's walk through how this actually unfolded, because the violence began before he even reached the campus. Early that morning, the suspect used his grandfather's handgun to murder his own grandparents at their home. By mid-morning, he arrived at the school armed with that exact same weapon. The attack phase then began, with him firing from room to room. Finally, 2.5 hours later, he was found dead inside a classroom. Now, local reports initially differed on whether he was engaged by police or if he took his own life, but this timeline firmly establishes a very prolonged, terrifying window for this crisis. Now, what's really interesting and chilling about these details is the specific level of preparation. The suspect blended in perfectly by wearing his purple school uniform, but he also carried a crossbody bag, which strongly suggests he deliberately brought extra ammunition. In fact, he was seen reloading the firearm during the incident to continue shooting. Witnesses and peers described him as troubled and noted he had previously shown a distinct interest in guns as well as the FBI. These details paint a picture of premeditation that is absolutely vital for investigators to understand. Part 4. The emergency and official response to secure the scene. Despite the school being located well outside the center of Bangkok, the emergency response was impressively swift. The entire school was evacuated, dozens of police officers, emergency responders, and ambulances rushed in to transport the 23 injured victims to nearby hospitals. And crucially, authorities immediately recognized the severe psychological toll here, so they deployed mental health workers right away to assist the highly distressed students.
All the while, you had anxious parents rapidly gathering outside the school gates, waiting in absolute fear for news of their kids.
Once the scene was stabilized, official statements started rolling in. Prime Minister Anutin Chanvira addressed the public, calling the shooting a terrible incident that simply should never have happened. Concurrently, Education Minister Praset Jantarangong pledged that tighter security would be implemented at schools across the board. We're reporting these statements impartially, of course, but it's really important to note them because they lead us directly into a much broader societal conversation.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Thailand's gun control debate and the systemic issues at play.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core of the debate. Officially, Thailand has very strict gun laws. It is exceptionally difficult for a citizen to obtain a legal firearm license. But the reality on the ground? It's starkly different. The country struggles with high numbers of illegally owned guns, a thriving black market, and soft-air guns that are incredibly easy to modify so they fire live ammunition. So the legal framework is strict, yes, but the illegal access is alarmingly open.
Now, you might be wondering why the Thai public often remains pretty skeptical of government pledges for tighter security. Well, it comes down to devastating recent precedents. Just this past February, there was another school shooting in the south of the country carried out by an older student. And many still deeply feel the trauma of a nursery mass shooting just 4 years ago in the Northeast, where an ex-police officer killed dozens of young children. After that incident, there were very similar pledges to tighten gun control, but observers point out there have been few signs of significant changes in enforcement since then.
All of this leaves us with one final critical question that really summarizes the systemic issue here. Can Thailand effectively control the possession of guns? It's a provocative question, and it echoes the sentiments of journalists and everyday citizens alike in the wake of this tragedy. Because until the gap between official policy and the reality of the black market is actually closed, communities are likely going to continue pondering the future of school safety. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep seeking to understand the facts behind the headlines.